There is a moment every person watching this has experienced. Someone talks over you in a meeting. A colleague takes credit for your work and smiles about it across a conference table. A friend dismisses your opinion in front of others. A boss speaks to you with open contempt, knowing you feel you cannot leave. Someone in your own family treats you like you are small. And in that moment, your body does something interesting. Your chest tightens, your jaw locks, your mind races through 100 things you could say. You either respond in a way that comes out wrong, or you say nothing and walk away feeling like you surrendered a piece of yourself. That feeling, that specific visceral feeling, is the experience of someone who has not yet understood what Machiavelli understood more than 500 years ago. Disrespect is not an insult. It is a test. It is the world pressing its thumb against you to measure how much give there is. And if it finds give, it presses harder. Every time. Without exception. Niccolò Machiavelli spent his entire career studying this. Not in theory, from inside the machine of power itself. He served the Florentine Republic for 14 years as its second chancellor, conducting diplomatic missions to the court of King Louis XII of France, Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I, and Pope Julius II. He watched rulers rise. He watched rulers fall. And when the Medici returned to power in 1512, he was arrested, subjected to the strappado torture, and stripped of everything: his position, his income, his identity as a man of consequence. What did he conclude from all of that? That it was not the kind ruler who endured, not the generous one, not the beloved one. In chapter 19 of The Prince, one of the most substantial chapters in the book at over 3,000 words, he identifies the two things that truly destroy a man of power. The first is being hated. The second, and far more insidious, is being despised, held in contempt, regarded as someone who can be tested without cost. You can survive hatred. History is full of people who survived being hated. What you cannot survive is contempt, because contempt removes the psychological barrier to moving against you. Once you are despised, conspirators feel no fear. Rivals feel no hesitation. The disrespect you have tolerated once becomes the permission structure for everything that comes after. Today we go deep into 8 principles that Machiavelli embedded across The Prince and The Discourses, drawn from rulers he studied directly, that explain not just how to respond to disrespect, but how to build yourself into someone it rarely arrives for. Drop this in the comments before we continue. I choose presence over reaction, strategy over impulse. Now let us begin. The first and most immediately actionable law is this: the moment you explain yourself to someone who has disrespected you, you have already lost. This runs against everything you were taught. You were taught that good people communicate, that misunderstandings are cleared up with honesty, that explaining your reasoning demonstrates maturity. And in relationships between people who genuinely respect each other, all of that is true. But we are not talking about equal relationships. We are talking about moments where the power dynamic is being actively challenged. When someone disrespects you and your instinct is to correct the record, to explain why they are wrong, why your position is sound, why you deserve to be heard. That instinct comes from a legitimate desire for fairness. But what it signals to the other person, and to every observer watching, is that their judgment of you matters enough to require a defense. The moment you defend yourself to someone who has challenged your status, you have implicitly accepted the premise that they have standing to judge you. Machiavelli understood this through his study of power. In The Prince, he writes extensively not about what a ruler is, but about what a ruler must appear to be. Because appearance is what other people act on. Reality is what you know. Image is what governs behavior. And when you over-explain, you are signaling that you are uncertain whether your image can hold itself without your intervention. Cosimo de' Medici, the Elder, the man who established 3 centuries of Medici dominance in Florence, was renowned for what historians have called his Sphinx-like character. The sociologists John Padgett and Christopher Ansell, in their study published in the American Journal of Sociology in May 1993, Robust Action and the Rise of the Medici, 1400 to 1434, described Cosimo's style of control as built around what they termed multivocality, the ability to be present in a situation without being definitively readable. Padgett and Ansell's analysis of Florentine council records found Cosimo's deliberate verbal interventions remarkably rare compared to his contemporaries. He moved and influenced, but rarely through open argument. He let people fill in the gaps, and because they filled in the gaps themselves, they talked themselves into supporting him. Pope Pius II, who knew Cosimo personally, stated that political matters were settled at Cosimo's house, that he chose who held office, that he decided peace and war. And yet, Cosimo almost never raised his voice. He almost never issued declarations. He almost never felt the need to explain. Mystery creates weight. Explanation dissolves it. Your silence, delivered with composure, communicates something that 1,000 words cannot. That the other person's opinion of you is not an emergency. Machiavelli is precise about this in chapter 19 of The Prince. He writes that a prince should let his judgments be irrevocable and maintain himself in such a reputation that no one can hope either to deceive him or to get around him. This is not about stubbornness for its own sake. It is about something far more important: the psychological cost of reversing your positions under social pressure. Every time you make a decision and walk it back because someone pushed you, you are not showing flexibility. You are showing that pushing works, and once people learn that pushing works, they push, on every decision, with increasing confidence. The disrespect that follows is not coincidental. It is a trained response. You taught them that your positions are negotiable under the right kind of pressure. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius is the example Machiavelli returns to repeatedly as the ruler who, among all those he studied, lived and died with his authority fully intact. Marcus was philosophical, measured, considered just to a fault. He was not feared in the brutal sense, and yet he was not successfully conspired against. He was not despised. Machiavelli's explanation: Marcus inherited the throne by hereditary right, owed nothing structurally to soldiers or populace, and was therefore not obligated to reverse his positions to satisfy competing demands. He was consistent, his judgments held, and people adjusted their behavior around that consistency. Now look at his son Commodus, who inherited one of the most stable positions in the ancient world. What the historical record suggests: the theatrical overreach, the swings between public spectacle and arbitrary cruelty, the frantic performance of titles and demigod imagery, is the behavior of a man who may have been desperate to manufacture authority he had inherited but did not feel entitled to. Whether this was rooted in insecurity or something closer to instability, historians have debated for centuries. What is not debated is the effect. He was impossible to anticipate, and that unpredictability did not inspire fear. It inspired contempt. People began to calculate. They began to conspire. The practical application: before you decide, think. Consult what you need to consult. But once you have decided, hold the line. When someone challenges you with pressure or a show of displeasure, acknowledge their perspective briefly if politeness requires it. Then stay your course. Over time, the people around you learn that your word means something. that your decisions are not opening bids, that moving against your commitments carries a real cost. That is the beginning of authority. Machiavelli answers the question of what happens when a person of power degrades themselves with one of the most detailed case studies in The Prince, the Emperor Commodus. Commodus became sole Roman emperor in 180 AD at 18, the son of Marcus Aurelius and inheritor of extraordinary stability. His reign gradually consumed itself in what ancient sources describe as a total collapse of imperial dignity. He became obsessed with the gladiatorial arena, not as a sponsor or spectator, but as a participant. The historian Herodian, writing close enough to these events to have direct knowledge, recorded that Roman spectators found it deeply scandalous to see their emperor take up arms in the amphitheater for sport. In Roman culture, gladiators held the same legal status as prostitutes. They were classified as infames, people stripped of civil standing. For the Emperor of Rome to perform publicly as a gladiator was not merely eccentric. It was a signal that the man holding the highest office in the known world had no understanding of the symbolic weight that office carried. Cassius Dio, a Roman senator who served during Commodus's reign and wrote as a first-hand observer, documented one of the most striking scenes in his account of the emperor. On one occasion, Commodus decapitated ostriches with specially designed darts during a public spectacle, then carried one of the severed heads toward the senator's seating area, making clear his gesture toward them. Dio writes that he himself chewed on laurel leaves from his garland to disguise the fact that he was laughing, and persuaded the senators near him to do the same. His exact words record that they were overcome with laughter rather than indignation. When your subjects are suppressing laughter at the sight of you, you have crossed the threshold into contempt. And contempt, as Machiavelli understood, is the point of no return. Machiavelli cites Commodus explicitly in chapter 19. He writes that Commodus fell into contempt with the soldiers, and being hated by one party and despised by the other, was conspired against and killed. On December 31st, 192 AD, his mistress Marcia and his two closest officials, Praetorian Prefect Latus and Chamberlain Eclectus, organized his assassination after discovering their own names on a list of people Commodus planned to execute. They poisoned him first. When it did not prove fatal, they dispatched an athlete named Narcissus, who strangled him. The people who were physically closest to him, those who should have been his greatest protection, chose to end him. Dignity is not arrogance. Dignity is not distance or coldness. Dignity is the consistent projection of self-respect through your choices, the environments you enter, the associations you maintain, the behavior you display under pressure. When you abandon it, when you debase yourself trying to be liked, trying to prove you are one of them, trying to perform for people whose approval you are hungry for, you do not earn affection, you earn contempt. The person who disrespects you has almost always identified, correctly or not, that you will tolerate it, that you will perform for them, that you will laugh at the joke at your own expense. The moment you stop performing, the moment you hold your full worth, and let that be your answer, the social calculation changes entirely. Louis I of France, who reigned from 1461 to 1483, in the period that directly preceded and shaped the world, Machiavelli moved through as a diplomat, stands as one of the most deliberate architects of intimidating reputation in European history. He was called the Spider King, not initially as a compliment. It referred to his habit of constructing webs of political intrigue from the shadows, of appearing modest and accessible, while building elaborate systems of intelligence and control. Louis was physically unimpressive, below average height, simply dressed, described by contemporaries as having a long nose and deep-set eyes. He did not project dominance through physical presence. He projected it through what people believed about him. Philippe de Commynes, a Burgundian diplomat who defected to Louis's court in 1472 and spent the next 5 years as the king's closest counselor, wrote the most detailed first-hand account of Louis that survives. He recorded that no ruler ever listened more constantly, sought information on so many subjects, or sought to know so many people, and that Louis's memory was so precise that he retained everything he heard. Louis built one of the most extensive intelligence networks of any European monarch of his era. What the record implies, reading Louis's behavior across his 22-year reign, is that he grasped something most rulers did not, that the reputation for omniscience was worth more than the actual intelligence it was built on. He rarely corrected exaggerated accounts of his reach or knowledge, whether that was fully calculated or simply the natural consequence of a temperament that was secretive by instinct. Scholars have long debated. But the practical effect was the same. People approaching him could never be certain how much he already knew, and that uncertainty operated as a constant check on their behavior. When enemies considered moving against Louis, they had to calculate against that uncertainty. Was he already aware? Had he already prepared a counter? Was this already a trap? That state of doubt, reinforced through consistent behavior across decades, was a wall that protected him without requiring him to constantly act. Machiavelli makes a parallel observation about Septimius Severus, who rose from a provincial family in what is now Libya to become Roman emperor in 193 AD, emerging from the chaotic year of the 5 emperors as the last man standing. Machiavelli writes directly that Severus's valor made him so much admired that the people were kept astonished and awed, and the soldiers respectful and satisfied. Severus held power through his final breath, despite genuine enemies in certain quarters, because his reputation for military prowess and ruthless calculation made the cost of moving against him seem prohibitive. Your reputation is not something that simply happens to you. It is built through consistent action over time, through the stories that circulate about how you handle certain moments, through a demonstrated willingness to hold your ground when folding would have been easier. Build it deliberately. Protect it as carefully as any material resource. It is working for you in every room you are not in every day. One of Machiavelli's most analyzed principles is his doctrine on the complete injury. He argues in The Prince that injuries should be done all at once so that, being tasted less, they offend less over time. Partial injuries, by contrast, allow resentment to build while giving the injured party time and motivation to prepare a counter-response. This applies directly to how you handle genuine transgressions, not momentary social awkwardness, not minor friction, but calculated, repeated crossings of clear lines. In these situations, the half measure is almost always more dangerous than either full forgiveness or a complete response. When Cosimo de' Medici returned from exile in 1434, he did not respond with broad rage or impulsive retaliation. He had been imprisoned and then exiled in 1433 by the Albizzi family and their coalition, who saw his growing dominance as a threat. Cosimo accepted the exile. He traveled first to Padua, then to Venice, taking his banking network with him. The economic disruption to Florence was so immediate and severe, contemporaries noted that the capital Cosimo carried with him drained critical financial capacity from the city, that the political coalition that had banished him collapsed within a year. When he returned, he worked methodically and completely. His rivals were banished in turn. The historical record is clear that he ensured they did not return. He did not imprison them and allow them a platform from which to continue agitating. He did not partially punish them and leave their networks intact. He removed them so completely from the Florentine political environment that the action required no repetition and no clarification. As Britannica records, his enemies went into exile, never to return. No one who witnessed it had to wonder what Cosimo would do if crossed again. Machiavelli also writes that threats are more dangerous than actions. A threat that is not followed through is an advertisement for your limits. Every time you escalate slightly and then pull back, every time you signal that you are upset but ultimately will not act, you are providing the other person with the precise information they need to calibrate exactly how far they can go. Remove that information. If you are going to act, act completely and let the record speak. If you are going to forgive, forgive completely and without the theater of lingering grievance. What you cannot do, what costs every leader who tries it, is live permanently in the middle. The middle is where credibility goes to die. There is a reason every tradition of strategic thinking, from the military philosophy of ancient China to the courts of Renaissance Italy to modern negotiation theory, returns again and again to the power of silence. It is because silence, in a moment of social tension, does something that no words can replicate. It forces the other person to generate their own response to what you have not said. When someone disrespects you and you immediately respond, you take the pressure off them. You fill the silence with your words and make your reaction the center of attention rather than their transgression. But when you absorb what they have done, hold your composure and say nothing or say very little, very slowly. Something shifts. The discomfort begins to locate itself where it belongs, with them. Padgett and Ansell's 1993 study documented Cosimo's reticence with notable precision. Based on their analysis of the detailed Florentine council records, they found that his deliberate verbal interventions were so infrequent as to stand out as exceptional events against a backdrop of other council members who argued, debated, and positioned openly. He was present constantly. He was observant constantly. But he was verbally minimal in ways that confounded his contemporaries. They could never quite read him. And that inability to read him created exactly the kind of caution that in practice was indistinguishable from respect. The psychological mechanism is precise. Human beings are deeply uncomfortable with unresolved social tension. When you respond to provocation with composure and near silence, the other person's nervous system experiences that silence as something that must be resolved. If they are operating from a position of guilt or uncertainty, which most people who disrespect others are, at least in part, they will often do the work themselves. They will over-explain, apologize, or escalate further, all of which gives you more information and more leverage than any rapid response of your own could have produced. Machiavelli's version of this principle runs throughout his discussion of reputation in The Prince. A ruler who responds to every provocation noisily and immediately projects fragility. The ruler who responds selectively and with measured deliberateness projects something entirely different, the sense of a mind that is always one step ahead of the situation. That quiet certainty is indistinguishable from authority. Disrespect often begins, not in a single visible moment, but in a story that has been circulating about you without your knowledge. It begins when people have formed an impression, frequently from your own behavior, your own oversharing, your own inconsistency, that you are someone who can be handled a certain way. By the time the disrespect arrives in front of you, the groundwork was often laid long before. Information is currency. What you reveal about yourself when you reveal it, and to whom, determines how people construct their mental model of you. And the mental model they hold is what governs how they behave toward you. Given what Machiavelli observed across his years of diplomatic work, watching rulers whose every weakness was catalogued and exploited by rivals. It follows that he understood this dynamic in depth, even if the prince frames it in terms of reputation rather than information management specifically. Louis I is among the clearest historical examples of a ruler who understood information control in both directions. Philippe de Commynes documented his obsessive attention to intelligence. What the record implies, reading Louis's behavior across his full reign, is that he understood the value of allowing certain impressions about his capabilities to persist without correction. He rarely contradicted exaggerated accounts of his reach or knowledge. Whether entirely calculated or the natural byproduct of a deeply private temperament, the effect held firm. People approaching him could never be certain how much he already knew, and that uncertainty was itself a form of power. In your own environment, this law works as follows. Most people, particularly in conditions of ongoing competition or social stress, reveal too much. They tell colleagues about their financial anxieties. They share their insecurities with people who are not trustworthy. They over-disclose in bids for connection that end up producing the opposite effect. They hand others the precise information needed to calibrate exactly how much pressure to apply. Every vulnerability you announce becomes a potential pressure point. Every anxiety you share becomes a potential lever. This does not mean becoming pathologically closed or emotionally unavailable. It means being strategic about the pace and context of disclosure. Share less than you feel like sharing in early relationships. Let the other person do the larger share of revealing. Watch carefully what they do with information. Build trust before extending it. Machiavelli frames this with characteristic directness. A prince must maintain himself in such a reputation that no one can hope either to deceive him or to get around him. That kind of reputation is not built through declarations. It is built through the pattern of what people discover and do not discover, about how your mind works and what your limits actually are. The final law is the most comprehensive and demands the longest view. While the previous 7 laws address how you respond to disrespect in real time, this one is about constructing a position in which disrespect becomes structurally irrational for the person considering it. Machiavelli concludes his analysis in chapter 19 with a specific observation, that a prince who is highly esteemed is not easily conspired against, because provided it is well known that he is an excellent man and revered by his people, he can only be attacked with difficulty. The word excellent here is critical. Machiavelli does not mean morally excellent in the sentimental sense. He means functionally excellent. Excellent in the way that makes him irreplaceable to enough of the right people that moving against him becomes an act of self-harm. Cosimo de' Medici understood this better than almost any figure of his era. His political dominance in Florence was not built primarily through force. He did not command a standing army. It was built through indispensability. The Medici banking network was threaded through the financial architecture of every significant Florentine institution, through the finances of the papacy, through the trade routes of every major European market. When Cosimo was exiled in 1433, the economic disruption to Florence was so immediate and severe that the political coalition that had banished him collapsed within a year, unable to sustain the cost of his absence. He had made himself the answer to too many important questions. And when you are the answer to important questions, the people asking those questions cannot afford to treat you with contempt. The calculation simply does not work in their favor. In your own life, this law operates across every domain. In your professional environment, the person who has cultivated irreplaceable knowledge, who connects critical functions, who understands systems no one else has bothered to learn, that person is not easily disrespected because the cost to the disrespecter is too visible and too real. In your social environment, the person who consistently generates value, who solves problems others bring to them, who is generous with what they know and who they know, that person commands a qualitatively different kind of treatment. The crucial distinction: you are not making yourself useful so that people will like you. You are making yourself excellent so that the world needs you. One is performing, the other is building. One makes you dependent on approval. The other gives you structural leverage that operates whether or not people like you. The results of this law are not visible in a week or a month. They are visible across years, in the way your position in any environment gradually becomes more secure, in the way the tone of conversations directed at you shifts, in the way that people who once tested you begin to approach you with a different quality of attention. You become someone who, when disrespected, carries with them the immediate recognition in the room that the person doing the disrespecting may have just made a significant miscalculation. Here is what Machiavelli actually understood, beneath all the strategic language and the historical analysis. The world is not primarily moved by righteous anger, by declarations of how wronged you have been, by performances of wounded dignity. The world adjusts itself for people who are so clearly in command of themselves, so clearly valuable, so clearly operating from a foundation of deliberate intelligence, that the easiest path for everyone around them is to get in line. Commanding fear, in the Machiavellian sense, is not about being terrifying. It is not about cruelty or the performance of dominance. It is about being a person whose respect carries a cost. When the people around you understand that disrespecting you is an expensive choice, most of them will not make it. Not out of love, not out of virtue. Because human beings, as Machiavelli observed with unsentimental accuracy, are primarily moved by what serves their interests. Make respecting you the clear interest. Make disrespecting you the visible miscalculation. Then let them decide. These 8 laws are not a quick fix. They are a framework for the person you are building, over months and years, through consistent practice and deliberate attention. Start with 1. Practice it until it becomes natural. Then move to the next. The transformation is cumulative and, eventually, irreversible. If this analysis shifted how you think about power, respect, and the mechanics of commanding authority, hit the like button and subscribe. We go this deep on every single video. Drop a comment below. Which of these 8 laws resonates most directly with something you are facing right now? And which historical figure do you want us to examine further? Until next time, stay strategic, stay composed, stay sovereign.